The conference championship games are officially here, so in this video, let's go ahead and try and break down as well as predict each NFL conference championship game. But if you guys do go on to enjoy the video, make sure to hit the like and subscribe button. We are on the road to 10,000 subscribers, so hit the subscribe button if you do go on to enjoy the video, but let's hop into it. Now, we are going to begin this video off with the NFC championship game with the Washington Commanders going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. I'm going to start off by breaking down each team, and then we'll kind of go into detail about my thoughts of the game. For starters, for Washington, I think that this has been honestly one of the greatest comeback seasons I've maybe ever seen in the NFL, at least up to this point. Because sure, we have seen teams kind of do a one-year turnaround where they were not a good team one year and then the next year they go on to have a really good magical run. I think a recent example is like the Houston Texans last year, the Cincinnati Bengals when they went to the Super Bowl, so on and so forth. But I really do believe that this season in specific with the Washington Commanders has been one of the greatest turnarounds, because this was a truly bad team for a very long time. You see, the difference for a team like Cincinnati, for example, who did make it all the way to a Super Bowl, was that Cincinnati team was a pretty decently built team. It was just really missing the quarterback position for many years. Not to mention Joe Burrow was already in his second year of the NFL. You know, granted, he did have the injury in his rookie season, but still, he was in his second season in the NFL. Whereas this Washington team has been completely reconstructed in one offseason to bring in guys like Bobby Wagner, Frankie Louvu, Dorrance Armstrong, so on and so forth, of course, including Jaden Daniels. And with Jaden Daniels having such a magical season, they have somehow been able to beat the likes of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are a veteran team with a lot of experience, and the Detroit Lions, who were probably the hottest team heading into the playoffs. So now you look at it and you kind of break down what Jaden Daniels has done in his rookie season. I truly do believe that there's an argument to be made that Daniels is having not only the greatest rookie season ever, but truly one of the greatest debut rookie performances in the playoffs I've ever seen. We're talking about a guy who I think you can make a legitimate argument for the case of him being already the best player in this year's playoffs, maybe outside of like Saquon Barkley. But even including Saquon Barkley, I do think that there is an argument to be made that Jaden Daniels has just simply been the most dominant player in this year's playoffs. He has not made mistakes. He has single-handedly carried this offense of Washington into this playoffs. I will give, of course, Terry McLaurin a lot of credit too, but Jaden Daniels has been the catalyst of the offense every single game. And again, he's not going up against bad teams. He went up against the Buccaneers, a veteran squad with a really good quarterback. The Detroit Lions, again, a veteran squad with a really good quarterback and some great coaches. Yet despite going up against these honestly hard matchups, they have quite honestly looked pretty dominant in both performances, especially in that Detroit game. Now, their opponent, on the other hand, Philadelphia, they are having a really good season as well. Now, we'll talk about Jalen Hurts here in a little bit, because I haven't necessarily been blown away with his recent performances, but in his defense, he has been going through a bunch of injuries, and well, he's just not making mistakes right now. The biggest player that we have to give a ton of credit for Philadelphia's magical season, of course, is Saquon Barkley. He's likely to win Offensive Player of the Year and is completely deserving of doing so. Going for over 2,000 rushing yards while also being a part of this passing attack is just simply put ridiculous. Saquon Barkley has also been the complete catalyst of this offense. In both games versus the LA Rams and their last opponent, he was the main reason why they won those games. Not Jalen Hurts, who was kind of the reason all the way back in 2022 that team was winning games. Not necessarily this year. This year, it's because of their rushing attack with Saquon Barkley. But even when you are able to stuff the run, Jalen Hurts is able to make enough deep throws, make enough big-time plays to A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith to keep defenses at least aware of the threat of Jalen Hurts. What also makes this offense even more dynamic, and it's something that we do have to question the effectiveness in this game, is the fact that you just can't simply keep your eyes off of Jalen Hurts because of his own rushing ability as well. Now, granted, I do believe that he had some sort of injuries happening in that LA Rams game, so we do have to at least keep that in mind as we go on to watch this game versus Washington. And I do believe that if Hurts is a fraction of what he normally is in the rushing portion of his game, it's going to demand him to be a bit more effective in the passing game, and well, thus far he hasn't really been that effective in my opinion. And I think a reason why he hasn't necessarily been that effective is, for one, the team hasn't really needed him to be all that effective because of how good Saquon Barkley has been this year. But I also do think that defenses have sort of figured out that Jalen Hurts isn't the greatest at like dissecting defenses in terms of, hey, he's going to be in cover 2, I'm going to throw it into the middle of the hole. I don't really know if that's something that Jalen Hurts is necessarily having a strength in. I think when Shane Steichen was the head coach, there was a lot of predetermined throws, some easy reads for him to get into, whereas with Kellen Moore, he's challenging him to be a bit more of like a pocket passing quarterback when it comes to dissecting defenses. And I just don't know if that's really Jalen Hurts' biggest strength. But regardless of that, Jalen Hurts is a capable enough quarterback to get this team into a championship game. Obviously, we've seen him do it 2 weeks in a row in the playoffs, and I think he's going to continue to do so against this Washington team. When it comes to some keys for the game, I think for Washington, they have to make this a 4-quarter game. If Saquon Barkley goes out there and just absolutely dominates the first 2 quarters, this game could potentially be over at halftime, even if Jaden Daniels is having a good game. And that's just simply put because Saquon Barkley is just that different at this position. If he is having an explosive first half, it just demoralizes your team and gets that Philadelphia crowd going. I also think that kind of in the same vein of that, Jaden Daniels has to get going early. Now, typically Jaden Daniels has been fantastic throughout the playoffs, but I want him to get going early in the first quarter, get this team maybe with a lead early on, or at least having a contested first and second quarter. So that way you can make this game truly a 4-quarter game. Another key for Washington is slowing down Saquon Barkley. I don't necessarily think that simply put, you could just stack the box against him because there are outside threats like Devontae Smith and AJ Brown that will just destroy your single coverage. So yes, you're going to have to stack the box, but I think you have to be strategic and smart with it because again, I don't think that you can have your corners on an island with their great receivers. I think in this game, maybe because of the injuries of Jalen Hurts, maybe you try to force Jalen Hurts to run with the football a bit more in this one. So if there is any RPOs or read play actions or whatnot, or whatever may be the case, if Jalen Hurts is somebody that could run the football, maybe you just let him try to run and see how that leg is actually doing. Because if Jalen Hurts is limited physically, I think that could potentially slow down this Eagles offense a tad bit, especially if he's not as explosive. Now for the Philadelphia side of things, I think one thing that you want to do is make sure that Washington has to stay balanced defensively. If Washington has no threat of a deep ball type of game where Jalen Hurts is willing to throw the ball around the field, then they can stack the box and really make things difficult for Saquon Barkley. But if Philadelphia can get the deep ball going as well as some intermediate stuff to AJ Brown and Devontae Smith, especially early, then I do think that Washington is going to have to play a little bit more balanced, which could ultimately allow Saquon Barkley to go ahead and go out and get some of those explosive runs. I think that those are ultimately the keys of the game, but when it comes down to this game, I do think that Philadelphia might just be a tad bit better. I haven't even talked about the Philadelphia defense because, well, Philadelphia's defense has been incredible this year. And when you look at that Detroit versus Washington game, yes, Jaden Daniels was on point and just honestly picture perfect in that game, but he was going up against a completely depleted roster of the Detroit Lions. Not to mention, I also do have a couple question marks on the Washington Commanders side of things when it comes to their rushing attack. Like, what do they actually have outside of Jaden Daniels when it comes to running the football? If you can't get Austin Eckler or Brian Robinson going, I just don't really know how you're going to be able to run the football if it's not Jaden Daniels just making some crazy plays. So I think Philadelphia's defense will be able to get enough stops, and I just don't really know how Washington is realistically going to slow down Philadelphia unless Jalen Hurts just does not look like his usual self. If Jalen Hurts' injury is that severe and he just literally cannot run at all or is just extremely ineffective with it, then I do think that does play into the favor of the Washington Commanders, especially if you're able to force him to really sit back there and dissect defenses, which is really not a strength. It's not a weakness of his, but it's not necessarily a strength of his. Ultimately, though, I do think Hurts and Saquon will do enough, and I think this defense should be able to keep them in this game. I have the final score, Philadelphia 34 to Washington's 24. Moving on to the AFC Championship game, we have a rematch between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Buffalo Bills. We're going to begin with the Buffalo Bills side of things here, and I think the biggest storyline for the Buffalo Bills and Josh Allen has been how dominant their ground game has been throughout these playoffs. Versus the Broncos, they were just simply able to run the ball down their throat over and over and over again. James Cook, 23 carries for 120 yards. Josh Allen, 8 carries for 46 yards. Ty Johnson, 9 carries for 44 yards. And then against the Baltimore Ravens, it was a lot more of the same. James Cook, 17 carries, 67 yards. Ty Johnson, 5 carries, 31 yards. Josh Allen, 10 carries for 20 yards. And Ray Davis, 4 carries for 29 yards. If you can get this ground game going against Kansas City, which is not an easy task to do, but if you can get it going, it's really going to play in your favor if you are the Buffalo Bills. Josh Allen is having a magical season, but truth be told, he hasn't really had to be fantastic in these playoffs because of just how dominant this ground game has actually been for Buffalo. Versus the Ravens, he had only 127 passing yards with no touchdowns. And versus the Broncos, 272 for 2 touchdowns, but it didn't really feel like Josh Allen was playing like the typical Josh Allen. So that tells me one of two things. One, this ground game is absolutely fantastic, and two, Josh Allen is due for a massive game in the playoffs, and well, it could potentially come up against the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, obviously, the last time these two teams played, the Bills won the game 30-21, and they were able to force Patrick Mahomes to have a couple turnovers in that game, which is something that I don't expect to see in this game, and at least in the playoffs, because Patrick Mahomes just does not make mistakes. He had 2 interceptions last time around, and I just don't see that happening again. Now, I will say Xavier Worthy did have a big game in that one, so that is a bit of a concern for Buffalo. They're definitely going to have to limit the speed of him, but again, we'll talk about that when we get to the keys of the game. Now, in that game versus Kansas City, the Buffalo Bills actually were not able to run the ball that effectively. Josh Allen 12 carries for 55 yards, James Cook 9 carries for 20 yards, Ty Johnson 5 carries for 18 yards, Ray Davis 5 carries for 11 yards. Pretty ineffective and a little bit concerning for the Buffalo Bills. They're going to have to get this ground game going in this game so that way they can continue to dominate in the ground game. But even if they cannot dominate in the ground game, I still think that Josh Allen will be able to do plenty in this game. His weapons with Khalil Shakur, his connection with Curtis Samuel, Amari Cooper, and Keon Coleman has really been growing these past few weeks, and I think that they should be in for a really good game versus this Chiefs team. This Chiefs team is ridiculously good on both sides of the football, but as long as Buffalo can play a clean game, I think they can win this game. Now, on the Kansas City side of things, kind of similar to Washington, I think they need to make this a 4-quarter game, not necessarily a game where Buffalo comes out the gate and just puts on like 14 points in the first quarter and really can put a lead on Kansas City, because I just don't know if this Patrick Mahomes-led offense is that explosive to overcome a sizable lead between them and the Buffalo Bills. So if they could keep this game relatively close, I feel pretty comfortable if I am the Chiefs, which, by the way, I think that they will be able to do so. As long as you can get into the fourth quarter within a 1-possession game, I do think Kansas City has a really good shot at winning this game because they will have home field advantage, they have Patrick Mahomes, and they got some referee help as well. Travis Kelce has been fantastic in these playoffs. It just feels like Travis Kelce always finds like a second wind in the playoffs when coming off really good seasons. In the regular season, he was, I don't want to say pedestrian, but was having pedestrian numbers from his normal self. Obviously, getting older with age, that sort of thing is going to happen. But when it comes into the playoffs, he is just simply put a different breed. If you decide to run zone coverage, he's going to find an open spot and just lay there and just wait till Patrick Mahomes throws the ball to him. And when it comes to man coverage, I don't know if there's a better player at getting separation from the tight end position, just because there's really nobody that can truly guard him. The only player that I think can legitimately shut down him is maybe Derwin James, but Derwin James is not going to be in this game. So guys like Matt Milano are going to have a really tough task of guarding Travis Kelce, and simply put, I don't think they'll have much success doing so. Now, the interesting thing about this one, and something that we at least have to mention, in their last showcase against each other, Travis Kelce only had 2 catches for 8 yards, which does tell me that Buffalo has the capabilities of slowing him down. I just don't really expect it. I think there's a lot of things that happened in their last performance that isn't going to happen again, which favors Kansas City but doesn't favor the Buffalo Bills. Things like Patrick Mahomes having 2 interceptions, things like Travis Kelce only having 2 catches. Also, you got to throw into here that Isaiah Pacheco is playing in this game, though he hasn't really been his typical self. So some of those things probably won't translate from their last meeting, but if Buffalo can have those things be a reoccurring theme, then obviously Buffalo has a really good shot to win the game. Now, when we get to the keys of the game here, I think Buffalo cannot make costly mistakes. As we know, the Kansas City Chiefs do get pretty regularly favorable calls, whether it comes to roughing the passer, unnecessary roughness, so on and so forth. We all saw the Houston Texans game. It was pretty ridiculous in my opinion. So if you are Buffalo, you cannot make those dumb mistakes that just can cause the game to be played into the ref's hands. If you let the referees control the game, it does favor the Kansas City Chiefs because they just know how to not make mistakes, and well, they know how to embellish certain things. So if you're Buffalo, do not let the refs control this game, because if you do so, it's going to come back to bite you in the ass. Whereas for Kansas City, obviously, you want this game to be played in the ref's hands. I'm not going to be the person saying that this thing is rigged or anything like that, but it's pretty clear and obvious that the referees do favor Patrick Mahomes and do favor some calls for him and his side. So if you are the Buffalo Bills, just be careful with the refs, and of course, if you're the Kansas City, just keep doing what you've been doing. In this game, Travis Kelce must play well, because if he does not get going, I don't really think that guys like DeAndre Hopkins or Noah Gray or Justin Watson or Xavier Worthy or so on and so forth can really make this game as close as it really should be. So if they can't get Travis Kelce going, which I do think that they will be able to do so, but if they can't get him going, that plays a massive favor to the Buffalo Bills. So if you're the Buffalo Bills, you got to make sure that your attention is simply put on Travis Kelce. Because outside of really Xavier Worthy and his deep ball speed, I'm really not worried about nobody in this receiving core. Hollywood Brown is there, but he hasn't really been a massive part of this offense quite yet. And yes, Xavier Worthy's deep ball, his deep speed, I should say, does concern me, but it's not like my biggest concern as long as I have safety help over the top. And DeAndre Hopkins isn't the same DeAndre Hopkins that we knew from Houston or even Arizona. Sure, he could still make a couple nice highlight plays here, but he doesn't generate much separation, and it doesn't really feel like his connection with Mahomes is all that special. So I'm not too worried about him. Granted, he could out of nowhere just pop off and have 100 yards this game. It's definitely something that could happen. So for the Chiefs, get Kelce going. For Buffalo, slow down Kelce as much as possible. One last thing before I give you guys my predictions, I do think that Patrick Mahomes and his legs will play a massive part of this game, both for the positive or for the negative. If Mahomes can really get his legs going, especially on 3rd and 4th down, I think that plays a massive favor to the Kansas City Chiefs. But if his legs are not a massive part of this game, then obviously Buffalo can probably find ways to win this game. I'm not saying this game will be dictated by whether Patrick Mahomes rushes for over 50 yards. I'm not saying that. But on those 3rd and 4th down conversions, a lot of the times Mahomes likes to use his legs. And if he is able to do so, it obviously does play very well for the Kansas City Chiefs, whereas it's going to hurt the Buffalo Bills because Mahomes' legs, as frustrating as they might be sometimes, are a legitimate weapon. So if I am the Buffalo Bills, I do want to have that under consideration. Maybe you keep a spy on him on 3rd or 4th down to just prevent those type of plays from happening. But if you do so, you're likely only going to be blitzing 3 or maybe even 4 and having a 5th guy out there in sort of a spy coverage. So you got to be a little bit careful about that. I think you have to do it very strategically. Either that or you have to blitz him very strategically to get a free rusher. Ultimately speaking though, I feel as if Buffalo is ready to win this game. I think they've been playing better football throughout the season. Honestly, if you look at that Houston versus Kansas City game, Houston outplayed Kansas City in many ways. The difference in this game was Kansas City just did not make mistakes. They messed around and let the playoffs dictate the game, and well, it benefited the Kansas City Chiefs over and over again. Also, not to mention, Houston had a couple missed field goals that kind of killed their chances. So for Buffalo, just do not let this game get into the refs' hands, which I don't think they'll do so. Take advantage of your red zone opportunities, make your field goal, limit the penalties, and I think that the Buffalo Bills will win this game. So all that said, I'm going to pick the Buffalo Bills to defeat the Kansas City Chiefs finally in the playoffs. I have the final score 27 Buffalo, 24 Kansas City. But you guys let me know in the comment section below your predictions for both these games, and if you enjoyed the video, hit the like and subscribe button. Again, road to 10K. Love you guys. Peace.